So I'm Donal. I'm the Head of Development for Statkraft Ireland, and for those who aren't familiar with Statkraft, Statkraft is the largest renewable energy generator in Europe and based out of Norway, a Norwegian utility, and is kind of on a big growth trajectory at the moment. And as part of that growth trajectory, in October of last year, Statkraft acquired the Element Power portfolio, and we're now based out of Cork, as Gail said. So before I get to the main part of my presentation in relation to the planning and the policy enablers in planning, I suppose David this morning in his presentation referred to pillars, and I've called them a stool here. So I have 3 legs on my stool, and I think they kind of align up with your pillars, David. But basically, just to say from a developer's perspective, what we'd like to see in the market is that you have a functioning planning system, a functioning system where you can get grid capacity allocated, and a functioning route to market. And look, lots of different speakers have spoken about grid and route to market today, so I will be focusing on the planning side of things. But just to say that, we need these other parts of the stool working as well, and we actually need them all kind of working together. So we do need the planning system working with the grid system, and we can see that it is happening already with the ECP, that now that's linked to actually having planning consent. And the next step we would see then is on the route to market side, that the RES auctions would be linked with the grid capacity allocation as well, so that there's sufficient projects getting grid capacity in good time and being able to participate in auctions. So turning then to the main part of my presentation is in relation to planning and, as Gail said, a developer's perspective on planning issues at the moment in Ireland. And I then again have broken that into 3 main areas. So I'm going to speak about the wind energy development guidelines. I'm going to speak about the regional planning or local planning approach, and I'm going to speak about the planning system itself then as well. So on the wind energy guidelines, Statkraft, and Shane has covered it very well in his last presentation, but Statkraft has done its own internal analysis of the draft noise guidelines that are out at the moment, and due to go for a consultation again shortly. And what we've done is we've taken a site that is permitted today, has been designed and can be operated in compliance with the 43 decibel LA90 limit with 0 curtailment. So we've taken that site and we've run our interpretation of the preferred draft approach through that. And what we've seen is quite stark. We've seen that that same site, which as I say would require 0 curtailment today, would require up to 20% curtailment to comply with the interpretation of the preferred draft approach. So obviously very, very significant impact coming down the line if that bears out. What we've also done then is just to convert that to something that people can kind of readily understand, is that site that I say has planning and can comply with the limits today with 0 curtailment. That same site would require 1.6 kilometre setback effectively to have 0 curtailment today under the preferred draft approach. So look, pretty stark picture there, I would suggest, but I suppose there is kind of a silver lining. Shane's referred to it, and through various conversations that I've had with other noise consultants in recent times. And I suppose what I would just say, in relation to this, if there is any one thing to be taken out of my presentation today, can people look at this aspect of it and consider it and see if it bears true on their sides, because I believe this is the way out of the current issues that we're seeing in the draft guidelines. So what this is saying is that the World Health Organization came out with its guidance last year and a reference of 45 dBl then, which Shane spoke about. But based on the conversations I've had with noise experts over the last number of weeks, we believe that a fixed upper limit of 43 dB LA90 can meet the 45 dB then. So why then are we talking about a range of 35 dB to 43 dB when a fixed upper limit of 43 dB LA90 can meet it? I mean, if just to put that into context, I think based on some initial analysis, we think that would have the curtailment down to somewhere between 1% and 2% on the site. So it's a massive reduction, and would seem like a logical approach to take. So I'd ask developers in particular to look at that one and weigh in behind that proposed solution if they see fit. The other aspect of the WEGs that we've looked at is in relation to setback. So the proposal at the moment is that the setback would now be linked to 4 times tip height going forward. And I suppose we believe that is sending the wrong signals to industry. Everybody's talking about cost of energy now. Everybody's talking about driving down the cost of energy through the various auctions. The best way you'll do that is getting the most modern and most efficient turbines on the site. And if you ask any of the turbine suppliers in the room or outside, I think what most of them will be able to tell you is that their cost of energy reduction measures are focused on their newer, modern, taller turbines and not on their smaller turbines that may not be around when RES comes around to pass. So what I would say on that is that the 4 times tip height is just, from a policy point of view, I think it's the wrong way to go. And while we're on cost of energy, just trying to convert that 20% curtailment to present, how stark this can be. Bill Sadler was kind enough to share this slide with me from the last IWEA conference where Bill presented a trajectory of onshore wind getting from, somewhere around the refit prices in 2017, which is 77 euros a megawatt hour, and getting down towards 55 euros a megawatt hour. And there's various steps along the way there, and we're making assumptions around 20-year RES contracts, which may or may not come to pass, driving down the cost of the OPEX and the CAPEX on the turbine side. But the big one in there is, you'll see the big drop, is actually getting the modern, more efficient turbines on the site. And Bill has run the 20% curtailment back through his model, and what he's actually coming out with is that the impact of that would be somewhere around 13 euros a megawatt hour. So that if that does come to pass, and if we get all the good news on rates, get good news on the longer term RES contracts, drive down costs further, we're still getting back towards the 70 euros a megawatt hour, which, from an industry where our unique selling point is our cost of energy compared to our competitors in, say, in wind and, in offshore wind and solar. It's very, very important that we're mindful of any of the implications that, do come out of the guidelines that could lead to this increase in cost of energy. So moving from WEGs then to the regional planning versus local planning. From a developer's point of view, we've seen a number of issues in recent times with local county development plans. So what we've seen in a number of cases over the last couple of years is that some local councils have been using their county development plans to effectively de-zone counties for wind. We've had a number of judicial reviews. There's been 2 in Donegal and 1 in Laois, and a number of others that potentially were on the cards as well to be taken. There are issues with the local planning approach at the moment. What we've seen most recently is that the local authorities that are trying to de-zone, or that have used the county development plans to rule out kind of further wind development, it's along the landscape sensitivity classification that the focus seems to be. And I suppose the local authorities that have put in renewable energy strategies or wind energy strategies into their county development plans, they've tended to use the LARIS methodology, which is a very good methodology, industry-wide constraints in terms of all the constraints that Brian mentioned in his study earlier. Very good methodology, but the one thing it didn't have was just a consistent landscape sensitivity classification. And here's an example then of what this can lead to with a county basically having 2 classifications. The red, which represents approximately 95% of the county, is deemed to have low capacity for wind. And the one sliver then that isn't actually low capacity has actually no capacity. So here's an example of just, what I was talking about, where it's, basically trying to prohibit future wind development. And like the guidelines where I believe we have a solution around an upper fixed limit of 43 dB LA90, I think we have a solution here as well, and it must be acknowledged that the department are working towards a more regional planning approach. That will help in terms of consistency, in terms of landscape classification within the region being consistent. And the other policy measure that's being consulted on at the moment is the REPDEV, which is the Renewable Energy Policy and Development Framework, being consulted by the DCCAE and moving forward as well, which seeks to identify areas in the country for future renewable deployment. So look, there are measures being taken here, but they are very much needed. And my next slide again just illustrates why So what I've taken here, there's lots of colours going on, and if you're like my managing director who's colourblind, you'll have to forgive me, but I'll try to explain what I'm trying to show here. You have 4 local authorities which have boundaries, which are bounding each other and have, are basically backing onto each other. And what you've done, as I mentioned, is there's no consistent methodology to determining the sensitivity of landscapes. So each of the 4 of them has actually 4 different methodologies here. Some of them have a 5-point weighting scale, going from low to moderate to high to very high to exceptional. Another has a 3-point scale, low, medium, high. And then 2 others have 5-point weighting scales, but they're different. And on the higher end of things, they're talking about special and unique landscapes. And I suppose what tends to happen then is at the boundaries you get massive inconsistencies. So if you look here, you're actually going from one side of the boundary where you're at a low sensitivity landscape straight into a high sensitivity landscape, which is hard to comprehend as to how that could happen over the space of crossing a county bounds. And I suppose just to give you the context, what developers tend to try to do is, try to go for the low sensitivity landscapes where there's a capacity to absorb wind farm development. So, this inconsistency is difficult to kind of plan around. Here's another example. You're going from low, in this case actually, to a very high sensitivity landscape. And here are 2 others. And look, to be fair, I've picked these 4 counties here, but this is all over Ireland. And again, the regional approach here should address some of this and should have a regional approach to actually kind of, saying what are the sensitive landscapes within a region and not just depend on the local authorities to do it. The third part of my presentation then is in relation to the planning system itself. And I suppose, what does the developer seek from a planning system? Besides getting planning, I suppose realistically what a developer wants is consistency, and consistency in around how an application will be adjudicated on and treated during the timeline that it's in the system. And then the second part is something around certainty around the timing of the application. So in this regard, we see the local authorities are bound by statutory timelines to decide cases. So local authorities have to turn around planning decisions within 8 weeks of a submission being lodged. And in cases where further information is requested, it's again, there's statutory timelines as to when the applications will be decided when the further information is submitted. Very different when you get to An Bord Pleanála. And in our experience and our analysis, An Bord Pleanála can take anywhere between 6 months and 2 years to decide planning applications. Apart from being very frustrating, there are just a number of practical issues with this. So one issue is that if you're in a system for 2 years or more, there could be strategic changes happen. So there could be a change to a county development plan that fundamentally changes the zoning of your site. And you're not able to incorporate that into your application unless you're actually requested for further information. Secondly, then there's issues, or potential issues, I guess, around the quality and adequacy of assessment. So that if something's in the system for over 2 years, standards and methodologies are moving on the whole time, and it may leave the wind farm planning decision or the assessment itself open to judicial review. And finally then, just from a business and trying to run a development business perspective, there's massive uncertainty in terms of trying to budget and resource around when we think something will come out of effectively a black hole. And in this regard, there's a solution as well. So we've had the regional planning approach being a solution to the local planning issues. We've had, hopefully, a fix that we think we can implement on the draft noise guidelines. And here we have a fix as well. So this time, it's actually 3 years ago this month, so March 2016, there was a review published of An Bord Pleanála, an independent third-party review, which contained 101 recommendations. And some of the recommendations have been put in place. So, the Office of the Planning Regulator now has been set up, or being set up, which is to be welcomed. But the recommendations around the points that I'm talking about, consistency and timing, from what I can see, have not been put in place and will be very much welcomed. So these 2 specific recommendations are talking about the consistency point. So in our experience, you can get very different experiences depending which inspector you get on a case, and then inspectors can view different parts of the assessment very differently from each other. So this here is talking about having stronger oversight and management of the inspectors to ensure consistency in approach when dealing with, to be fair, pretty technical issues. And as a developer, we'd very much welcome that. And the second recommendation then is just to have the board itself talking to the inspectors more, because as it is today, they're very much independent of each other. And we believe, the board should be able to feed back its thoughts at a high level as to what are the important issues for the inspectors to look out for when they're doing their reports. And in relation to timing, there's been recommendations as well. So this slide is just basically saying that the statutory objective period for cases should be 18 weeks, or 22 weeks if you're SID, and that should be a statutory objective for on-board plan audit to decide those cases within that timeline. And this recommendation then just says that legislation should be amended to require on-board plan audit to give realistic expectation as to when they will decide cases, because as I say, it very much feels at times that you're in a black hole. You don't know when you're going to come out of it, and it's very much you're waiting till you get the envelope as to whether you have planning, and also, as I say, just the frustration at having to wait and not knowing when that might come. So that's my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.